Elizabeth Holmes founded the company Theranos in 2003, claiming her device could run hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood. At its peak, the company was valued at $9 billion, but it was all an elaborate lie. The technology never worked, test results endangered patients, and Holmes was convicted of fraud in one of the biggest corporate scandals of modern times. In 2023, she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. In the 1990s, Nigerian conman Emmanuel Nwudi scammed a massive Brazilian bank out of $242 million by selling them a Nigerian airport that never existed. Posing as a top banking official, he used forged documents and fake phone calls to convince executives they were funding an incredible deal. The fraud ran for years before auditors finally exposed it. Nwudi was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but much of the money was never recovered. Tanya Head became president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network after gaining fame for her harrowing survival story. She claimed to have barely escaped the collapse of the South Tower, suffering third-degree burns while crawling through smoke and flames, while watching several colleagues die around her, including her own fiancé, whose body was never recovered. She led tours of Ground Zero for grieving families, gave emotional public speeches, and became an inspiring face of 9/11 remembrance. But in 2007, it was finally exposed that she wasn't even in America on 9/11. Her entire story, right down to the dead fiancé, was all an elaborate lie. Decades of intense drumming took a brutal toll on Phil Collins' body, causing such severe nerve damage that he can no longer hold onto drumsticks. After spinal surgery in 2009, Collins lost much of the feeling in his hands and was forced to give up drumming entirely. The loss devastated him to the point where he contemplated taking his own life. In 1974, Stanford student Arliss Perry was found murdered in a campus chapel, posed kneeling at the altar with a candle stuck inside her body in what appeared to be a ritualistic killing. The case went cold for decades until in 2018, DNA linked it to a campus security guard who took his own life as police attempted to arrest him. In 2021, during a wedding ceremony in Uttar Pradesh, India, a bride named Sarabi collapsed from a heart attack and was pronounced dead shortly afterwards. But instead of canceling the expensive event, both families agreed to continue the wedding by marrying the groom to Sarabi's younger sister, Nisha. The ceremony went on while Sarabi's body was placed in another room in the house. The incident shocked many and was confirmed by local news and relatives, who watched in total disbelief as a wedding and funeral unfolded under the same roof. Tara Correa McMullen was a rising young actress best known for playing a gang-affiliated teen on Judging Amy, but in a cruel twist of fate, her real life began to mirror her on-screen role. At just 16, she started dating a 26-year-old member of the Crips and moved into gang territory in Inglewood, California. In 2005, she was gunned down outside of her apartment in a gang-related shooting, struck multiple times and left to die on the sidewalk. The man who killed her was later sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without parole. In 2011, 48-year-old New Zealand truck driver Stephen McCormick slipped between the cab and trailer of his truck and landed ass-first onto a compressed air hose. The metal nozzle pierced his left cheek and began blasting air into his body at around 100 psi. But instead of entering his bloodstream, which would have killed him instantly, the air forced its way beneath his skin, inflating him like a balloon and separating his fat from muscle tissue. His body swelled rapidly while his skin became dangerously tight as paramedics rushed him to the hospital. Doctors managed to relieve the pressure and stabilize him, and against all odds, McCormick survived the freak accident without any permanent damage. In 2008, a 7-year-old boy from India named Akrid Jaswal performed life-changing surgery on a poor village girl whose fingers had been fused together from severe burns. Her family couldn't afford proper medical care, so in desperation, they turned to Akrid, a child prodigy who had taught himself medicine by reading textbooks at age 5. Despite no formal training, Akrid successfully separated her fingers, restoring the use of her hand. He later entered college at age 12 and now works as a medical researcher, driven by his mission to cure cancer. Milli Vanilli became global pop stars in the late 80s, winning a Grammy with hits like Girl You Know It's True. But in 1990, it was exposed that the duo had never sung a single note on their own records or during live shows. They were always lip-syncing to tracks recorded by studio singers. Their Grammy was revoked, albums were pulled from stores, and the scandal became one of the most infamous frauds in music history. Belle Gibson built a global wellness brand by claiming she had cured her terminal brain cancer through diet and natural remedies. But in 2015, journalists revealed she never actually had cancer at all and also lied about donating to charity. The scam made her millions but ended in total disgrace. She was fined 400,000 Australian dollars for misleading customers, and her wellness empire completely collapsed. In the early 2000s, Rudy Kurniawan became one of the world's top rare wine sellers, moving millions of dollars worth of supposedly priceless bottles to elite collectors. But behind the scenes, he was running the biggest wine fraud in modern history. Rudy refilled bottles with cheap blends, forged labels, and even used UV light to adjust his fakes so that they'd fool collectors' authentication tools. In 2012, the FBI raided his home and found an entire wine forgery lab, stacks of empty bottles, fake labels, corking machines, and a massive stockpile of cheap wine. In 2014, Rudy was sentenced to 10 years in prison in order to repay all $28.4 million. But to this day, some of his fakes are still sitting undiscovered in the world's finest wine collections. In 2021, 16-year-old Kennedy Littledyke was ejected from her car during a high-speed crash in Idaho, miraculously landing on a 30-foot-high power line dangling upside down by her now broken leg. The pressure from the wire pinched her femoral artery, preventing her from bleeding out, while an electrical burn cauterized another wound in her neck. She hung there for about an hour until rescuers finally cut the power and freed her. Despite having 21 surgeries and losing her leg, Kennedy miraculously survived, and now shares her story and journey to recovery to inspire others online. In 2020, 16-year-old promising soccer player Alexander Gomez was tragically shot and killed by police in Mexico after officers allegedly mistook him for a criminal when he was riding his motorcycle to buy a soda. The killing sparked national outrage and drew attention to police violence in Mexico. At the boy's funeral, his teammates honored him by placing his coffin in front of a goalpost and gently kicking a soccer ball against it to score his final goal, a moving tribute to a life full of promise that was cut tragically short. In 2001, an elderly Japanese man named Tatsuo Osako passed away quietly at the age of 88. It wasn't until after his death that people discovered he had helped over 2,000 Jewish refugees escape Nazi persecution during World War II by quietly stamping their travel documents and sheep-herding them onto ships bound for safety. He never spoke of his actions, kept no accolades, and lived a modest life as a travel agent. His family only found out that he'd secretly saved thousands of lives after discovering old photos and records that were tucked away in his home. Before launching Punk'd, Ashton Kutcher was developing a much darker hidden camera show called Harassment. In 2002, one of its earliest pranks involved staging a gruesome fake murder scene inside a Las Vegas hotel room, complete with a very realistic, bloody, lifeless corpse. Two unsuspecting guests walked in, believed they had discovered a real dead body, and were left completely traumatized. The stunt triggered a $10 million lawsuit against Kutcher, MTV, and the hotel, forcing the network to shut down the show before even airing a single episode. The backlash was so severe that Harassment was scrapped entirely, leading to the creation of the far tamer celebrity prank show Punk'd. In 2007, a Massachusetts state employee named Michael Fiola was nearly sent to prison after countless files of were discovered on his work-issued laptop. He was immediately fired and charged, facing years behind bars, until forensic experts discovered that the device had actually been infected with a virus that automatically visited up to 40 CP sites per minute, even when he was nowhere near it. The activity was so extreme and constant that it proved impossible for a human to replicate, ultimately clearing Fiola's name. Though the charges were dropped, Michael and his wife spent nearly $250,000 defending him from an awful crime he never committed. Mark Hoffman was a skilled forger who gained notoriety in 1980s Utah by selling fake historical documents, many of which targeted early Mormon history. His most infamous creation, the Salamander Letter, falsely claimed that Joseph Smith's divine revelations involved a magical salamander, casting the origins of the Latter-day Saints Church in a bizarre and controversial light. Hoffman sold these forgeries for tens of thousands of dollars, duping collectors, historians, and even high-ranking church officials. But as demand grew, he began accepting payments for documents he hadn't yet forged, falling deep into debt. When clients started questioning delays in authenticity, Hoffman resorted to violence, killing 2 people with homemade bombs before accidentally injuring himself while attempting to plant a third. Although mangled, he survived and later pled guilty to murder and fraud. Now 70 years old, he's been in prison since 1987 and will likely remain there for the rest of his life. Coach Tyler Wall was a 38-year-old fitness mentor who played a central role in MrBeast's recent video, Lose 100 Pounds, Win $250,000, where he trained contestant Maj in a grueling months-long weight loss journey. Tyler provided constant support physically and emotionally as Maj fought to shed over 100 pounds. But tragically, midway through filming, Coach Wall was found dead in his Greenville, North Carolina apartment on February 18, 2025. His death was described as sudden and unexpected, with no official cause publicly disclosed. Completely devastated, the MrBeast team gave Maj the choice to stop the challenge, but he chose to continue in honor of his late coach. Maj ultimately completed the drastic transformation, dropping from 324 pounds to 222, achieving the goal he and his coach set out to reach together. Despite initial hesitation, the MrBeast team chose to release the video with a tribute honoring Tyler's impact, ending with the words, "In loving memory of Coach Tyler Wall." Morbid Facts, Part 650. There were countless serious warning signs leading up to the implosion of the OceanGate Titan submersible. Experts repeatedly flagged the vessel's experimental design, particularly its carbon fiber hull, which is prone to microscopic weaknesses under deep-sea pressure. Former OceanGate employees raised alarms about structural integrity, previous dive malfunctions, the fact that the sub's navigation system relied on a modded Xbox controller, and over 100 documented equipment issues, including a 2022 incident where passengers heard alarming cracking sounds as the pressure increased. But despite this, OceanGate's CEO Stockton Rush pushed forward, publicly dismissing regulation as a barrier to innovation. In fact, the warning signs were so clearly numerous that after the implosion, many have speculated that Rush may have even had intentions, citing his repeated disregard for safety warnings and his presence on board during the fatal dive, though no evidence has officially confirmed this theory. In 1951, Mary Reeser was found almost entirely burnt to ashes in her armchair, with only her lower leg, backbone, and shrunken skull still remaining, while the rest of her Florida apartment showed very little fire damage. Though many speculated that it was a case of spontaneous human combustion, experts believe that she accidentally ignited herself while smoking and burned under a rare phenomenon known as the wick effect, where her clothing caught fire and her body fat acted like a human candle, fueling a slow, smoldering blaze that consumed her from within. To this day, the case remains one of the most chilling fire deaths ever recorded. In 1761, a French ship carrying 160 Malaysian slaves crashed into the barren Tromelin Island, resulting in 100 of them drowning while shackled below deck. The surviving 60 slaves were forced to build a raft for the fleeing French crew, who promised they'd return but never did. Stranded on a small desolate sandbar with no trees, no fresh water, and no hope, the abandoned slaves endured 15 harrowing years. They scavenged shipwrecked debris for crude shelter and tools, drank rainwater when it fell, hunted seabirds and turtles to stave off starvation, and managed to keep a fire burning despite there being no trees on the island. When rescue finally arrived in 1776, the island held only 7 emaciated women and a single infant. In a resurfaced video from 2016, Cardi B casually confessed to robbing men during her stripping days, luring them to hotel rooms under the guise of sex, then stealing from them once they were unconscious. No victims ever came forward, leading many to believe they were either too ashamed, unaware, or unable to remember what happened. Cardi later defended herself by saying she did what she had to do to survive and that she would do it again without regret. The confession drew widespread outrage in comparisons to infamous cases of sexual exploitation. Yet despite her disturbing admission, no charges were ever filed and her career continues to thrive. In October of 2023, a hunter stumbled upon the remains of a missing man deep in the mountains of Colorado. Lying faithfully beside him was his white Jack Russell Terrier, Finney, having somehow survived the unforgiving wilderness for months, refusing to leave her owner's side. A grieving daughter from the UK placed her mother's ashes in a bottle along with a touching message before throwing it into the ocean. Her mother had passed away from a heart condition at the young age of 51, never having the chance to fulfill her dream of traveling the world. The bottle was soon found by a family who posted the story online before honoring the heartfelt request. While filming in Atlanta in 2023, Jamie Foxx suffered a sudden life-threatening stroke brought on by a brain bleed. The exact cause was never publicly revealed, fueling widespread speculation. Foxx blacked out for 20 days and required emergency brain surgery to save his life. When he finally woke up in a wheelchair, unable to walk or speak, doctors warned him this will be the toughest year of your life. Foxx later described seeing a terrifying hot tunnel and admitted he came within inches of death. He had to relearn basic functions and now calls the experience a brutal reminder of life's fragility. In 2010, 24-year-old Australian woman Phoebe Hanjuk was found dead at the bottom of a trash compactor after somehow plunging feet first down a narrow 12th-floor garbage chute. Experts argued the act would have been virtually impossible without assistance, yet her death was ruled accidental and no one was charged. In 2010, a woman tried to smuggle a live, drugged-up tiger cub through a Bangkok airport, hidden inside her checked suitcase among several plush toy tigers. Security only discovered it when an x-ray revealed bones and a tiny beating heart among the pile of lifeless toys. The cub, barely hanging on to life, was rescued and later rehabilitated by a wildlife protection center. Just hours after receiving this note, he was dead. In 1992, 31-year-old Mexican singer Chalino Sanchez took the stage at a packed concert in Culiacan, Mexico. Known for his ballads about the drug trade and the lives of narcos, Chalino was no stranger to danger. In the middle of a song, a man from the crowd approached the stage and handed him a small folded note as cameras captured the moment. Chalino paused, read the note carefully, and gave a slight nod before continuing his performance, but now with a visible tension in his voice and eyes. Hours later, after leaving the venue, Chalino and his entourage were stopped by armed men posing as police. He was abducted, and hours later his body was found on a remote dirt road. His wrists had been bound, and he was shot and killed execution style. To this day, no one knows exactly what was written on that piece of paper, but many believe it was a final death threat from someone who intended to make sure Chalino's voice was silenced forever. Gary Coleman became a massive star as a child on Diff'rent Strokes, earning him millions, but his parents and business advisor embezzled most of his fortune over the years. Once he turned 18, he sued them and won a measly $1.3 million settlement, by which point his career had faded and the medical bills were racking up. As an adult, Coleman struggled financially and battled constant health issues from congenital kidney disease, the condition that resulted in his 4'8" height due to the medications used to treat it when he was a child. His final years were marked by bitterness toward Hollywood and especially his parents. He once said, "If I had the choice, I wouldn't be famous. I'd be a happy, healthy, regular guy." When he suffered a fatal brain hemorrhage after a bad fall in 2010, Coleman had written in his will that he wanted no funeral, no wake, and that his parents should not be informed about or allowed to attend any memorial services held in his honor. In 1991, Eric Clapton's 4-year-old son Connor was visiting his mother's apartment in a New York City skyscraper. The building was undergoing maintenance, and a janitor left a window open without a safety guard on the 53rd floor. While playing, Connor ran toward the window, which was floor to ceiling, and fell 49 stories to his death. Despite the negligence, no criminal charges were filed against the worker responsible. At the time, Eric had just begun to build a relationship with Connor after years of struggling with addiction. Completely devastated, Clapton channeled his grief into writing Tears of Heaven, one of his most popular songs to this day. In 2018, a man was riding an escalator in a New York City subway station when his oversized sweatshirt suddenly became caught in the machinery. As the escalator continued moving, the fabric began to tighten around his neck. By the time help had reached him, he'd already been strangled to death by his own clothing. In 2018, Brad Lewis leaped from a 13-foot-high balcony to grab his 2-year-old son who had fallen while chasing a toy. Lewis cradled the boy midair, taking the full impact on solid concrete. He suffered a fractured skull, brain injuries, and a broken vertebrae, while his son survived with only minor injuries. In July of 1991, Paul Reubens, famous for playing Pee Wee Herman, was arrested in Florida after undercover detectives caught him masturbating inside of an adult movie theater during a sting operation. The scandal caused public outrage as his hit children's show was pulled off the air and Pee Wee merchandise was yanked from stores. But just months later, Reubens made a bold surprise appearance in character at the 1991 MTV Video Music Awards, where he received a standing ovation before cheekily asking the audience, "Heard any good jokes lately?" The moment became iconic, helping to restore his public image despite the silly controversy. In ancient Greece, men had to go to the gym completely naked. These spaces were exclusively for men, and exercising in the nude was meant to promote the appreciation of the male physique as a tribute to the gods. Back in the 1940s, Walt Disney Studios had an exclusive men's-only lounge called the Penthouse Club reserved for their top animators. Tucked away on the rooftop, it featured a private patio where many of the artists enjoyed sunbathing in the nude. But the tradition came to an awkward halt when word got out that nuns from a neighboring hospital had been peeking at them.